Have you ever woken up in a tent, deep in the wilderness, and noticed the damp, shimmering beads of water clinging to the fabric of your rainfly? You probably wiped it off, just morning dew, a mild inconvenience. But what you were actually looking at was a miracle of physics. You were looking at proof that the atmosphere around you is trying to hand you free, clean drinking water. And it has been doing this, quietly, every single night since before humans existed. Right now, the invisible air directly above your head contains more available fresh water than every single river on Earth combined. Not underground, not frozen at the poles, hovering, waiting. And what if I told you that tapping into this invisible ocean does not require a billion-dollar desalination plant, or a factory, or even electricity? What if it requires nothing more than a $2 piece of mesh, 2 wooden poles, and the patience to let gravity do the work? Today, we are going to trace a thread that stretches from the ancient deserts of Peru, through the fog-covered dunes of Namibia, into the laboratories of modern universities, and finally, into the boardrooms and courthouses where powerful interests are quietly trying to make sure you never learn what you are about to hear. We are not going to tell you there is a grand conspiracy. The truth is more mundane than that, and in many ways more disturbing. No one had to suppress this technology, they just had to make sure no one profits from teaching it to you. This is Historia Prime. Let's begin. Part 1. The civilization that drank the fog. To understand the future of water, we have to go back roughly 1,500 years, to the southern coast of Peru. The Nazca people are famous for one thing: their massive geoglyphs, enormous drawings carved into the desert floor, visible only from the sky. Hummingbirds, spiders, geometric lines stretching for kilometers. For decades, researchers debated their purpose. Were they astronomical calendars, religious symbols, landing strips for alien visitors? But a quieter group of archaeologists was asking a different question. Not what the Nazca drew, but how they survived long enough to draw anything at all. The Nazca homeland sits in one of the driest coastal deserts on Earth. Annual rainfall in some areas is less than 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter. You spill more water brushing your teeth. And yet the Nazca sustained a complex civilization for over 800 years. They built cities, they wove elaborate textiles, they irrigated crops. How? The answer was not beneath the ground, it was floating above it. Every morning a thick fog called the garua rolls in from the cold Pacific current and blankets the Peruvian coast. It is not rain, it does not fall, it drifts, and the Nazca learned to catch it. Archaeologists discovered networks of stone ridges and low walls, carefully positioned on hillsides facing the ocean. As the garua rolled inland, the fog collided with these stone surfaces. The moisture condensed on the cold rock, droplets merged, and gravity pulled the water downhill into collection basins carved from the earth. No pumps, no pipes, no chemistry, just geometry and patience. Across the Atlantic, on the volcanic Canary Islands, the indigenous Guanches survived using a technique so elegant it sounds like myth. They identified specific trees, most likely a species of laurel, whose leaves were shaped in a way that naturally combed the thick ocean fog. The trees would literally drip water. The Guanches dug cisterns beneath these fountain trees and let nature fill them. They did not conquer water. They simply paid attention to where it was already going. But the true master of this technology is not human. It is smaller than your thumbnail, and it lives in one of the harshest landscapes on the planet. Part 2. The beetle that taught scientists to drink the sky. The Namib Desert stretches along the southwestern coast of Africa, through modern-day Namibia and Angola. Parts of it receive less than 2 millimeters of rain per year. The sand dunes reach 300 meters high. Daytime temperatures can exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Almost nothing lives there. Almost. In 2001, two researchers, Andrew Parker and Chris Lawrence, published a paper that would quietly change the field of materials science. They had been studying a small, unremarkable-looking beetle called the Stenocara gracilis, found on the fog-bathed dunes of the Namib. Every morning, just before sunrise, this beetle performs a ritual. It crawls to the crest of a sand dune, faces into the wind coming off the Atlantic Ocean, and tilts its body upward at a precise angle. Then it waits. What Parker and Lawrence discovered under the microscope was extraordinary. The beetle's shell is covered in a pattern of tiny bumps and troughs. The peaks of the bumps are hydrophilic, meaning they attract water. The valleys between them are coated in a waxy, water-repelling surface. When the ocean fog drifts across the beetle's tilted body, the microscopic water droplets in the fog stick to the hydrophilic bumps. As more droplets accumulate, they merge into larger drops. When a drop gets heavy enough, gravity takes over, and the waxy troughs act like channels, guiding the water straight down the beetle's back and into its mouth. This creature is drinking the sky, and it has been perfecting this design for millions of years. Parker and Lawrence realized they were not just looking at a biological curiosity. They were looking at an engineering blueprint. The beetle had solved a problem that entire industries are built around: how to extract fresh water from air that does not feel wet. Their research launched a wave of biomimicry projects around the world. Engineers began designing surfaces that replicate the beetle's bump and trough pattern. Some created mesh nets for fog catching. Others developed coatings for building facades that could passively harvest moisture in dry climates. The science was proven. The blueprints were published. And yet, decades later, almost nobody has one of these systems on their roof. To understand why, we need to talk about physics first, and then we need to follow the money. Part 3. The physics of pulling water from nothing. Let us slow down and understand what is actually happening, because the science behind this is deceptively simple. And once you understand it, you will never look at a foggy morning the same way again. The air around you is never truly dry. Even in a desert, the atmosphere contains invisible water vapor. This is measured as relative humidity. In the Sahara at midday, humidity can drop as low as 10%. But at night, when the temperature falls, that same air's humidity can climb to 40% or higher. Here is the key. Warm air can hold more water vapor than cold air. When warm, humid air touches a surface that is colder than itself, the air releases its moisture as liquid droplets. This is called condensation. It is why your glass of iced tea sweats on a summer afternoon. It is why your car windshield is wet every morning. It is the same physics, everywhere, every time. A fog catcher exploits this principle on a larger scale. Picture a large piece of mesh, roughly 1 meter by 2 meters, stretched between two poles on a hillside. The mesh is oriented perpendicular to the wind. When fog or humid air blows through the tiny openings in the mesh, the water droplets are too heavy to pass through cleanly. They collide with the threads, cling, merge with neighboring droplets and grow. When the drops get heavy enough, gravity pulls them down into a gutter that feeds a collection tank. It is a net for water that is already floating in the air. And the numbers are startling. In the Atacama Desert of Chile, one of the driest places on Earth, rural communities have installed fog-catching nets on mountain ridges. A single large net, costing almost nothing to build, can harvest 200 to 400 liters of water per day during fog season. That is enough to supply drinking water for a small village. No electricity, no chemical treatment, no monthly bill. In Morocco, the non-profit organization Dar Sihmad installed a fog collection system in the Anti-Atlas Mountains that now provides clean water to over 400 people in 5 villages. Before the nets, women and children walked hours each day to carry water from distant wells. Now the water comes to them, from the sky, for free. More recently, researchers at the University of Texas at Austin developed a gel-based film using raw materials costing less than $2 per kilogram. This film absorbs moisture from the air at night like a sponge, then releases it as clean water when heated by the sun during the day. In lab conditions, it produced over 6 liters of water per day from air with only 30% humidity. Let me say that again. A material that costs pennies, requires no electricity, and turns dry air into drinking water. 6 liters a day. The technology works. It is cheap. It is proven. So the question becomes, why is this not on every rooftop in the world? Part 4. 300 billion reasons. The global bottled water industry generates over $300 billion in annual revenue. 300 billion. For a product that, in most developed countries, is chemically indistinguishable from what comes out of your kitchen tap. To understand how this happened, you need to understand a concept sociologists call inverse quarantine. Normally, when a community faces a threat, we quarantine the threat. We isolate the sick, we remove the contamination. But with water, something different happened. Instead of demanding that governments fix the infrastructure, we were sold a personal solution. We learned to protect ourselves from the environment, rather than demanding the environment be cleaned up. Buy a filter, buy a bottle, build a bubble. And no one builds a more profitable bubble than the bottled water industry. The economics are almost absurd. Major corporations acquire the rights to pump millions of gallons from aquifers and municipal sources, often paying fractions of a cent per gallon. They run it through standard filtration, put it in a plastic bottle, and sell it at a markup that can reach 1,000 times the cost of the equivalent volume of tap water. Profit margins in the industry regularly exceed 50%. And the product itself? In many cases, it is literally tap water, repackaged, relabeled, sold back to the same communities it was extracted from. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. The industry's marketing depends entirely on the perception that tap water is unsafe and bottled water is pure. But reality keeps undermining that story. In recent years, investigations in France revealed that several major brands, marketed as pristine natural mineral water, had been secretly using prohibited purification methods to conceal bacterial and pesticide contamination. In one case, regulators ordered the destruction of 2 million bottles after fecal bacteria were detected in the source water. Meanwhile, peer-reviewed studies have consistently found microplastics in bottled water, sometimes at concentrations thousands of times higher than what is found in treated tap water. The very plastic that is supposed to protect the purity of the water is contaminating it. So the product is not purer, it is not safer, it just costs more. Now, imagine a world where the average household can collect its own water from the air, where rural villages in fog-prone regions no longer depend on trucked-in deliveries, where the $2 mesh net on a rooftop quietly replaces the $20 case of water bottles every week. This is not a fantasy. It is already happening in Chile, Morocco, Nepal, and dozens of other communities around the world. The bottled water industry does not need to ban fog catchers. It just needs you to never hear about them. And so far, that strategy has worked remarkably well. Part 5. The Law of the Sky. Now, let us address the claim in the title of this video. You have probably seen some version of this headline: water collection devices banned in multiple countries. The internet loves a dramatic exaggeration, but in this case, the truth hiding behind the clickbait is genuinely strange. No government has banned fog catchers, but several have made it surprisingly difficult to catch rain. To understand why, we need a quick history lesson. In the American West, water has been legally treated as property since the mid-1800s. When settlers moved into arid territories, they developed a legal framework called the doctrine of prior appropriation. The principle was simple. The first person to claim water from a river and put it to beneficial use had a legal right to that water ahead of anyone who came later. This made sense in a landscape where one rancher diverting a stream could destroy another rancher's livelihood downstream. Water rights kept the peace. They prevented chaos. But over time, the doctrine expanded. Courts and regulators began to interpret it broadly. Some states concluded that all water, including rain that fell on private land, was part of the same hydrological system. And if that water was legally claimed by someone downstream, then catching rain on your own roof was, technically, theft. For years in Colorado, collecting rainwater from your own roof was against the law. In Utah, you needed a government permit. And in Oregon, a man named Gary Harrington was prosecuted and sentenced to 30 days in jail for building natural catchment ponds on his own rural property. 30 days in jail for catching rain. Now, to be fair, the legal landscape has shifted. Colorado legalized limited rainwater collection in 2016. Utah relaxed its permit system. Many states have modernized their water codes. The old prior appropriation doctrine was designed for a different era, and legislators are slowly catching up. But the deeper pattern is worth noticing. In many jurisdictions, the default legal assumption is still that water belongs to the state, not the individual. And in a world of tightening water scarcity, that assumption is getting more important, not less. Now here is where the corporate angle enters. Lobbyists representing agricultural and industrial water users have historically opposed reforms that would make home collection easier. Their argument is practical. If millions of rooftops capture rainwater before it reaches rivers and aquifers, downstream users lose supply. And that argument has some merit. But critics point out that in most urban settings, the volume captured by home collection is negligible compared to agricultural and industrial use. A rain barrel on your porch is not draining a river. It is barely a rounding error. And yet the regulatory burden falls disproportionately on individuals, not on the corporations pumping millions of gallons from public aquifers for pennies. You cannot patent the condensation cycle. You cannot trademark the morning fog. And in our current economic system, what cannot be packaged, owned, and sold at a markup is simply not promoted. Part 6. The Survivalist's Blueprint. Knowledge without application is just trivia, so let us make this practical. Whether you are a backcountry hiker, an off-grid homesteader, or just someone who wants to understand how water actually works, here are 3 methods you can build this weekend. One critical note before we begin. Water collected from fog or condensation is not automatically sterile. It can contain dust, airborne bacteria, and pollutants depending on your environment. Always filter and purify collected water before drinking. A simple boil for 1 minute, a UV pen, or a basic activated charcoal filter will handle most contaminants. This step is not optional. Method 1. The tarp condenser. This is the simplest survival method, and it works anywhere with nighttime humidity above 40%. Take a standard camping tarp. Stretch it at a slight angle between 2 trees or poles using paracord, with one end about 15 centimeters lower than the other. Position a clean container beneath the lowest corner. During the night, the tarp's surface radiates heat into the open sky and becomes colder than the surrounding air. Moisture in the humid air condenses on the cold plastic, runs downhill along the surface, and drips into your container. On a humid night, you can wake up to 1 to 3 liters of collected water. While you slept, doing nothing. Remember to filter or boil before drinking. Method 2. The fog catcher. Go to any hardware store and buy a roll of woven polyethylene or polypropylene window screen mesh. Cut a panel roughly 1 meter wide by 2 meters tall. Drive 2 sturdy wooden or PVC poles into the ground and stretch the mesh tightly between them. The critical factor is placement. Orient the mesh perpendicular to the prevailing wind direction. Attach a folded piece of aluminum or a plastic gutter along the bottom edge, angled to drain into a collection bucket. If you live in a coastal area, a mountain valley, or any region where morning fog is common, this setup can passively harvest 2 to 5 liters per day. The total cost of materials is under $5. For best results, elevate the mesh. Higher placement catches cleaner air with less dust. Method 3. The solar still. For dry climates where fog is rare, dig a hole roughly 1 meter across and half a meter deep. Place a clean container at the center of the bottom. Cover the hole with a clear plastic sheet and seal the edges with rocks or dirt. Place a small stone in the center of the sheet, directly above the container, so the plastic sags into a cone shape. During the day, the sun heats the ground beneath the sheet. Moisture from the soil evaporates, rises, condenses on the cooler underside of the plastic, and drips down the cone into your container. This method produces less water, typically half a liter to 1 liter per day, but it works in extremely arid environments where other methods fail. This is the same distillation principle used in laboratories. The sun provides the energy, gravity does the collection, you just set the geometry. A commercial atmospheric water generator can cost $3,000 or more. These three methods use the same fundamental physics. The difference is that one generates quarterly revenue for a corporation, and the other gives you independence for pocket change. But be honest about the trade-off. DIY systems require effort, maintenance, and realistic expectations. They will not replace your municipal water supply, but they can supplement it, and in a survival scenario, they can save your life. Conclusion. We began this story in a tent at dawn, staring at drops of water on nylon and thinking nothing of it. Now you know what those drops really are. They are the visible edge of an invisible ocean. An ocean that the Nazca people learned to harvest with stone walls 15 centuries ago. An ocean that a small beetle on a Namibian sand dune has been drinking for millions of years. An ocean that modern scientists have only just begun to tap with materials that cost less than your morning coffee. The technology is real, it is ancient, it is proven, and it is almost absurdly cheap. The atmosphere has not changed. The condensation cycle works today exactly as it did at the dawn of life on this planet. The morning fog still rolls in, the dew still forms. The sky is still offering water to anyone who knows how to catch it. The only thing that has changed is who profits from your thirst. The next time you wake up in that tent and see the water clinging to the fabric above your face, do not wipe it away. Look at it. Really look at it. That is not an inconvenience. That is an ancient technology working perfectly, reminding you that survival was never about money. It was about paying attention. If this video taught you something new, subscribe to Historia Prime and share it with someone who needs to hear this. We will see you in the next one. Stay curious, stay resilient,